Hey everyone! Today I will be comparing three very popular prime lenses for portrait photography at an on-location photo shoot. So I have three focal lengths that we'll be comparing today. I have lots of photo examples to show you guys, and I want to share with you what I think each of these focal lengths excel at and what each of these focal lengths don't do so well. So the first comparison that we're going to be doing is by taking a photo with Charlotte and I standing in one spot on each of these lenses. The first focal length we have is the 35. I have the Zeiss 35 1.4, which is going to be our widest lens for today. I also have the Zeiss 50mm f1.4, and finally, I have the G Master 85mm f1.4, which is going to be our most zoomed in focal length. So as you can see with these three photos side by side, this is the wide range we have between each three of these lenses. For the rest of the comparisons in this video, I'm going to be moving around to frame each picture on every lens to look the same. So this is going to start giving us an idea of how a focal length affects a person and the background in a photo. So the first comparison we're going to do is with a full body shot. We're going to start on the 35. The 35mm has the least compression and the background is more prominent in our photos. I personally really like this lens for my portraits because you can see more of the background. Next up we have the 50mm, and this is my go-to focal length for full body shots. The 35 can distort what someone's body looks like by stretching it out, but the 50 is more true to the eye. There is also some depth of field to help your subject stand out from the background, but it's not too much, as I like that you can still make out what the location looks like in the background. Last but not least, we have the 85mm, and this is a great lens for full body shots if you're going for a magical feeling in your photos. The compression and background to foreground separation makes for some really standout shots where the subject is the main focal point of the image and the rest of the background just melts away. In the final comparison photos, you can really see that the 35 background is super prominent in the shot. In the 50mm shot, Charlotte starts to stand out a little bit more, and in the 85mm shot, the background is fully blown out in some beautiful creamy bokeh. For our next comparison, I'm going to take a mid-length portrait in landscape orientation, and I find that this is where the three lenses look the most similar to each other. Starting again with the 35mm, there is some distortion here depending where you place your subject. So usually when I'm shooting with a 35, I try to avoid placing anything at the very edges of a frame, as that's where limbs and heads and objects in the frame start to stretch out. For fashion photography, I do love this weird look. It's quite editorial looking. I also love that when you have enough space between your subject and the background, the bokeh is smaller, but it looks so beautiful in the background. So now I've switched over to the 50mm 1.4 for the mid-length shots. Just like the full body shots, I always feel like the 50 focal length is the safe in the middle option. There is still a little bit of distortion, but not that much that it's going to start distorting facial features and limbs, and the background to foreground separation is really flattering for portraits. Next up, we have the 85mm, and to be honest with you, I don't particularly like capturing shots like this with an 85. When I'm using an 85, I definitely like to push the limits a little bit more and shoot either extreme close-up photos or extreme full body shots. I actually shared an example of how I like to use an 85 this way with the extreme full body shots in my 85mm composition tips video, so I'll leave that link down below if you guys want to watch that. I'm gonna get a little bit more into the sun so we have like a lens flare. But again, just like we saw in the full body shots, as we get closer, you can see how the 85mm is starting to flatten out our subject, and she looks much more prominent in the photo compared to the other two focal lengths. For our last comparison in today's video, I'm going to be taking an extreme close-up photo, and I'm going to take two different ones for this. I'm going to take a portrait orientation close-up and a landscape orientation close-up. And this is where I think you'll be able to see the most difference between each of these focal lengths and how it affects someone's face. Even though I personally like using a 35 for close-up portraits, it's not a look for everyone and it doesn't always work. In the close-up photos is where you can see the most distortion when it comes to using a 35mm lens for close-ups. Again, I choose to use a lens like this because it looks weird and editorial and I just like what it looks like. So it's not always flattering, but it does have its uses. You can see that the 35 makes noses appear a little larger and it makes your subject's facial features appear closer together. In the 50mm close-up portraits, our subject looks more like they do to the real eye. The 50 still has a little bit of distortion, but not as much as the 35, where it's going to really distort facial features and stretch things out in a photo. This framing here is about as close up as I would usually go when taking close-up shots with a 50. If you get any closer, you will start to notice more distortion. Last but not least, the final lens change for today that we have is the 85mm for our close-up portraits. And finally, we have the 85, which is my favorite focal length to take close-up portraits with, especially portraits in landscape orientation. The compression helps your subject stand out even when there is a lot of negative space in the photo. So one of the reasons an 85 can be super handy for portrait photography is if you are shooting in a very busy looking location, you can use an 85 and use that compression to your benefit to help calm down the background and get your subject to stand out more in your photo. You can also see that this lens is compressing and flattening out our subject's face. So here's something a little bit interesting that I wanted to talk to you guys about is how a focal length can really change what someone's face looks like. And I notice this the most with an 85 because it does have that flattening feature that it does with the compression of that telephoto lens. So take someone like me, for example, I have quite a round face and I find that when I get my portrait taken with an 85, it flattens my face out even more than what I see in real life and it looks even rounder. So for me personally, I prefer having a photo taken on like a 50, which is a little bit wider. It's going to slim my face down in a portrait a little bit more. So as you can see in these comparison photos, you can really see Charlotte's face shape change depending on what lens we're using. So compression and distortion is relative to the distance and focal length, but this comparison and pretty much all my videos on YouTube are coming from a practical point of view and how you and me would use these lenses out in the field at a photo shoot. So as I've mentioned throughout this video, I choose to use the 35 because of its distortion. So sometimes I'll take photos with it where you don't see that distortion as much, and sometimes I'll really exaggerate that distortion for the creativity and the style of the photo. Similarly to the 85, sometimes I will accentuate that background to foreground separation you get, and sometimes I'll use an 85 because it's a flattering focal length for the particular person I'm taking a photo of. So in summation, and to describe to you why I would choose to pick up each of these lenses at a photo shoot in very generalized terms, the 35 is a fun editorial looking lens that I use to show off more of the background, to tell more of a story, and to really accentuate and exaggerate features with the distortion. The 50mm I would say is an in-between lens. It's not bad at anything, but it also doesn't have a standout look. But in saying that, it is super easy to capture all kinds of portraits if you only have one lens. And finally, the 85 is a beautiful lens for close-up portraits. It's great for getting that nice compression, the background to foreground separation, and I would personally use this lens if you like bokeh and making your subject stand out for a classic portrait photography look. So if you're stuck deciding on what lens you should buy, what should be your next prime lens, hopefully this video and those example images will help you out. From my personal experience, when I first started photography, I couldn't afford lenses. I could only afford one. So I decided to go for the 50mm focal length since it was such a good all-rounder lens to be able to capture a variety of portraits with. I could also do my own personal photography with it. I did a little bit of landscape photos as well, even though it's not perfect for that. But the point is, it was a good all-rounder lens since I could only have one lens. Since then, I have really grown my kit a lot, and I am a 100% prime lens photographer, so I don't have any zoom lenses in my kit. And I find now that I always use the 35 and the 85 together because they have very exaggerated looks to each other, and I don't reach for my 50 that much, as I would prefer to either go for the exaggerated wide look with a 35 or the exaggerated compressed look with an 85 instead of going for the middle ground and a 50. Another consideration is if you are a zoom lens photographer, say you have a 24-70 or some kind of equivalent and a 70-200, and you want a prime lens to be able to have a faster lens to shoot with, a 50mm might be a good option, since again, it's a jack of all trades. I'd love to know which one is your favorite prime lens in the comments below. For me, it's a 35, but you guys already knew that. And I want to say thank you so much for watching. I make new videos every single week, so I will see you guys all next time. Bye.